Okay, so our speakers today are Mashreeq Saim from Terdizom in Bangladesh and Ranjana Sharma from Siwan in Nepal, both of whom work on the Clarissa project. And then we have Angel Rojas and Isabel Crowley from Huponi, Mexico. Before we move on to their presentations, I will briefly introduce our moderator for the session. We're very lucky to have Lorraine Van Belerk, one of the members of our research forum, with us today. Lorraine is Professor in Human Geography at the University of Dundee. She has conducted research with street-connected children and youth in sub-Saharan Africa for about 2 decades and is published very widely on the topic. Her writing shows a keen interest in working for more effective participation of street children in both research and policy practices. And she was one of the research directors for the longitudinal and qualitative research project Growing Up on the Streets. I definitely recommend checking out the story map and briefing papers that came out of that project if you haven't seen them. They're really interesting. So with that, I will hand over to Lorraine to introduce our speakers properly and kick off the presentations.
Thank you very much, Shona. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really looking forward to this session. It looks set to be a hugely interesting and informative session, and I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our first speakers from the Clarissa project. So we have Mashreeq Saim, and Saim is part of the Clarissa Bangladesh team, which has collected around 40 life stories from the broader area that they're working in, and he specialises particularly in action research methodologies. Clarissa aims to bring a really strong evidence base and generate innovative solutions to the worst forms of child labour, and so it's going to be really interesting to hear how storytelling is part of their work. We also have Ranjana Sharma, who's also from the Clarissa project and CWISH, and she is from the Nepal team of the Clarissa project and a participatory action researcher. CWISH itself is a children, women and social service and human rights organisation. It's a women-led not-for-profit NGO, and it's been on the go for a couple of decades as well, with the aim to ensure social justice, protection and promotion of human rights, especially the rights of children. And again, I think that's a really interesting take when we look at storytelling in terms of children's rights and how children's rights are part of the sort of participation of children in their own stories. So I would like to introduce them to speak to us, and as you go along, if you're listening to the presentation, if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A chat box and we'll pick up on those afterwards. So Ranjana and Mashreeq, over to you.
Thank you, Lorraine. So me and Ranjana ji, sorry, I had to introduce myself, I guess, but thank you, Lorraine, for doing the work. So I will not spend any time in introducing us. So me and Ranjana ji, we will talk about our experiences in the process of life history collections from Bangladesh and Nepal. And we will talk a bit about how we have ensured child participation in every phases of the life history collection. As you can see from our first slide, we are Clarissa, we are Child Labor Action Research Innovation in South and Southeastern Asia. And initially, this program ran on Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Nepal. But because of the current political unrest in Myanmar, the program stopped there. So currently, Bangladesh and Nepal are functioning the Clarissa project. Next slide, please. So a bit about who we are. We are mainly funded by FCDO, and it is a consortium-based project, Institute of Development Studies. Terdizom, Child Hope, and Consortium for Street Children are the consortium partner here. And in Nepal, we have CWISH, Voice of Children, and Terdizom's Nepal. And in Bangladesh, our partners are Gram Bangla Unnayan Committee, GUC, BRAC Institute of Governments and Development, BIGD, and Dhaka Hassaniya Mission. Next slide, please. So I'll give you guys a few idea about what Clarissa is, and then I will go into the story collection process. So our aim of Clarissa is to build a strong evidence based on the drivers and generate innovative solution from those evidences. And our area of focus in worst form of child labors. So why this is our aim is because there are very weak evidence. There's not strong evidence to support the fact of that worst form of child labor prevails. And if I go to the ministry or some other influential sector of Bangladesh government, they will tell me, or if you go to them, they will tell you that there is no child labor in Bangladesh. They tell these kind of things because of the because of the evidence that are quite weak, and in the evidence that are already there, they do not actually reflect the perception of children and other stakeholders. They're mainly from some sort of bird's eye view. Next slide, please. So what are we doing? We are actually doing our project is mainly a evidence-based project. So we are trying to build a strong evidence-based and innovative solution to the worst form of child labor. Action research, participatory action research is the heart of our project. So we use action research to combine to gather evidence and learning, and a collection of life stories of hundreds of children to inform and shape intervention, campaign, and advocacy. We are also in talk with business owners and intermediators who are used as a uh, ladder for the children to join into WFCL. And our interventions ranges from small scale solution to local problems. And during the lifetime of the project, since its beginning, we have engaged ourselves in communication and advocacy regarding this project. Next slide, please. So as I've said earlier, our approach is mainly participatory, adaptive, and child-centered. And our main core driver of innovation is participatory and systematic action research. And what we do here is that we work together to support children to collect child-focused evidence. And we will generate child-focused and child-identified solution. Our evidence, all our evidences are based on the children and their experiences, and the solutions that we're going to provide from the evidences that we are collecting, it will be for the betterment of the children. Next slide, please. So now our next question is, why are we collecting life stories? In Clarissa project, participatory action research, Clarissa life stories is the heart of our Clarissa project and participatory action research. And we collect life stories to build a comprehensive picture of how children perceive their lives and the options they have, and to understand why children are driven into worst form of child labor and how these are impacting their lives, and to understand how the children and their families fight fight against this adverse situation that they face, and they find solution to the problem that they face. Next slide, please. So this is about what does a good life story looks like. You all know this, I guess. It's personal. It's nothing like an interview. It will explain everything that a person has to say. It will show us how one thing leads to another. And then after reading a life story, we will be able to see what people think has shaped their lives and why. And it has clear examples of different aspects of people's life, and it will also have factual information, which will help us to get information and evidences from those life stories. Next slide, please. So after collecting life stories, what we are now doing is that we are analyzing the life stories both in Bangladesh and Nepal. So why are we doing that? We are seeing that we are analyzing life stories to see the repeated patterns that run across the different stories, to identify causalities, to identify causal relations between the factors which describe how change happens, and to identify the different ways in how child labors impact different people, and to identify changes that has occurred which has led to a more positive trajectory for some people due to WFCL. Next slide, please. So these are the key steps of life history collection and analysis process in Bangladesh and Nepal. We are done with the life history collection. Now we are the life history analysis process. After life history analysis, we will have some themes which we will work on, and our action research groups will be based on those themes. Now, the next part is story collection experiences from Nepal, which will be presented by Ranjana ji. Thank you.
Thank you to my colleague for very clear information. Hello, everybody. My name is Ranjana Sharma, and as my introduction has already been given, so can I have another slide? Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so as my colleague was telling, like what is the good life story and why we focus on the life story of the children. To give you an example, like my personal example, before doing this life story collection, I was thinking like case studies and life stories are kind of similar thing where we go and ask the children with certain questions and they will reply us back. But then it was completely different. Actually, life story don't have any questions. We only have probing questions and deepening questions. And if there are particular things that children are focusing on their life, then we go on the deepening with those part of the life stories. That's how the differences are very much, there are very much differences between the case studies that we generally do and the life stories that we have taken as an participatory action research process in Clarissa. So talking about the Nepal, we have focused on the worst form of child labor, but there are so many forms of worst form of child labor available within Nepal also, but then we focused on the adult entertainment sector. And when we talk about the adult entertainment sector in Nepal, it is kind of hidden sector in Nepal, like dance bar, dhori, cabin restaurant, spa, massage. When you go normally over there, you cannot see as such any child labor or anything like that, because it will be all within the black curtain or within the night time. All these entertainment sectors are running, so the normal people, when we go there, we cannot see it, but that it's in a very hidden form. And we also focused on the neighborhood of these AES adult entertainment sector base. And why we focused on the neighborhood was because from the street children mostly going to these sectors, or domestic child labor later on gradually take up the ladder and go and work in the adult entertainment sector. And again, the slum children are working in this sector, and that's what have been found by the scoping study that has been done before by the Clarissa project itself. Before implementing the real project like Clarissa on the field, there were a couple of scoping studies that has been done by the IDS. And also the informal small business, we call AES sector as an informal small business, because it is not into the mainstream of the Nepal economy. That's why it's called a small informal business, where the worst form of child labor is very much visible. That's why we wanted to focus in these two areas. Thank you. Next slide. So what we did, key activities prior to the life story collection was, as you can see, there is one map itself, and Kathmandu area is not very much bigger in the size, but then it's the AES business is very scattered all over the Kathmandu Valley, and it was very difficult for us to like which area we should go. We cannot cover all the areas because we have to focus on certain key areas. So before collecting the life stories, what we did was we did the internal training, external training of all the staffs, and then we did the AES hot mapping. Hot mapping, the picture is on the right hand side of mine, and we also did the clustering of those areas, and we do the service mapping also, because when we are collecting the life stories, and especially with the children, it is very much possible like there will be emotional breakdown, or there will be other need of those children, and we wanted to support those children immediately without looking for any other long-term alternative. But for immediate support, we also did the service mapping, and then we did the risk mapping, mitigation, and safeguarding, because safeguarding is very much important for the Clarissa project itself. And then we also developed and went for the operational plans, like we had to do the life story collection during the COVID time, so we had to revise and re-revise the plans that we have been making all the deadlines and all that. And we also developed the child participatory toolkits like consent form, which is very important yet again for the Clarissa project, to get the consent from the children and from their parents. And also we have to contextualize the whole toolkit within the country specific needs and requirement. Like for Bangladesh it was different, from Nepal it was different, so we have to contextualize those. And also we developed the criteria of the children with whom we can take the story. Like we didn't want it to go for a very young child, like 10 years or 11 years. So in that case, there would have been lots of emotional trauma for that child, and we don't want it to give those things to the children. And we developed the evaluation matrix. And yet again, for Clarissa project itself, evaluation is a very important aspect. And this as a participatory tool, we had to develop all those metrics also. And we also developed our data management procedures and SOPs. Next slide, please. And during life story collection, what we did is the first phase, we went with the building the rapport with the potential storytellers from all those clustering area that we have finalized earlier. And the rapport building and trust building is a key heart of this life story collection, because until and unless you are very close to some child or anybody, they are not going to tell you your story, or they are going to fake yours or fake their story and tell you anything, whatever they want to say. But then the series of rapport building and trust building was done so that we can get the actual story from the children, and also with the community people, because when we go in the slum area, we cannot simply pick up the child and talk to them. There are certain gatekeepers with those children through which we have to approach those children. So we have to do all those things. And the pre-induction to the children and family was also very much important, because even after the rapport building, if even after the series of meeting, you tell them what you are planning to do, and they still need a detail, like what would be done, what kind of questions, or sorry, what kind of probing things will be there. So the pre-induction was also done, and taking consent was, as mentioned before, it was important. And we collected 350 life stories in total. And then again, during the life story collection, it was because the children's project, we wanted to get the children involved themselves to collect their peer interviews. So we again find out the potential children who can be the life story collectors from the children with whom we have already taken the interviews. And then we gave the training to those children. We gave nearly about 19 children, we gave the training, and then they went to the field and collect the 50 life stories from their peer, or from their within their circle, or with through another circle. So 50 life stories were collected by children themselves, and 350 by the staff. And so in total we collected 400 life stories. And feedbacks in between and after action review process are also very key and major steps during the life story collection. Otherwise, you will never know like what happened or what they are thinking. So that was important during the whole process. And as I mentioned, we have done the service mapping also. So psychosocial support and health kit support was also provided to the children during the life story collection. And as it was COVID time, so we had to give extra hygiene kits and all those to children to support. Like we were not only there for collection of our story, they should feel connected with us to give their real story. So we did that. And what post life story collection, what we are doing right now is identifying the children for a story analysis workshop. And we have in Nepal, we have already done our story analysis workshop, along with the clustering of the key issues that they have brought, and the big system map through the 400 life stories. And one of the example you can see on my right hand side is the system map. That's how we develop the from our life story. From individual life story, there are mini system map, and from mini system map we further go to the bigger system map to find out like what are the key chain areas where we should work in future, or children, or we should work together with children and families and other authorities and stakeholders to break that chain. So the worst form of child labor can be, at least we cannot simply claim like we are going to eliminate the worst form of child labor, but we can reduce that impact on those children very much through this kind of process in future days. And as mentioned by my colleague, we are going to form the action research group, and action research group is going to work in those group the children will be involved. It will be for through the children itself that they are going to generate more further innovative solutions on what solution they want to tackle their problem in their individual lives and in community. Thank you. Next slide. So at present scenario, as I already mentioned, 400 life stories has been collected, and 200 we did from adult entertainment sector, and 200 from neighborhood, and 50 were from children, and 400 life stories, analysis of the 400 life stories has been completed. Yeah, thank you. Next slide. And as I was mentioning, like life story about the life stories, we went through the different challenges, and we tried to mitigate them as much as possible, but we cannot say like it was 100% mitigated, but we tried to did that. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, like it was a COVID time, and there was lockdown going all over the world, and so was in Kathmandu and in Nepal. So we took maximum safety that was possible, and has priority was given for the children's safety. But time and again there were incidents like we as a staff we getting COVID or something. Then during that time we had to take a break, and we took a break for 15 days, 1 month time period, and then again we continued with our process. So that was one major challenge that we faced during our collection period. And selection of the respondent, even like the life story collector agreed to give you a story, but at the last moment they can say like, I don't want to give my story to you, or I'm not interested anymore. So in such cases, we tried to build a rapport and trust with them, and giving the induction to them, or giving them a space, or asking them, okay, they can relax or take a break or something like that. But even despite of all our mitigation strategy or all our effort, if they still consider like, no, we don't want to give the our story, then we give them like, okay, you can go, because in our consent form itself it has been mentioned like, if you don't want to withdraw any time in between of the story giving, you can withdraw. So you give them an opportunity, and some of them have withdrawn, but due to the extra emotional breakdown, and some we even given ourselves like, okay, we should not continue because of such scenarios, and they were directly further referred to our safeguarding person. And children's safeguarding and protection was very much important. So despite it was mentioned in the consent form, like we'll put your photo or story, or publish your story stories in one form or another in any of the Clarissa project related project or advocacy purpose. But then what we have decided is like, even the consent is given, for the safety of the children below 18, we are not going to publish any of the photo or any kind of their information linking with their life stories. And obviously the emotional issues I have mentioned before. Also, we had the template developed with like, if they need support, or there was a focal person for all that. And we have also tied up with the especially the psychosocial service provider foundation, so that in case of need they can be helped. And finding the children in the AS sector with the disability was the most challenging thing. And because adult entertainment sector, as the name itself says, like it's an entertainment sector, so children with disability are not easily found in those sectors. But still, in a Dori is especially a Nepali cultural folk song areas where they go for the culture song and all that. So in those areas, we have found certain children who are there working as a singer or as an dishwasher. So, and we also try to maximize our coordination with the disability-based organization, because CVC in itself is not a disability-based organization, but we try to maximize. But still, because of the AS is areas where works are done in night, so it was not as much visible with other group of children compared to the disabled children. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, please, Sayam, you can continue.
Thank you, Ranjanaji. Now I will talk about our experiences from the life history collection program in Bangladesh. So what have we done so far? So far, we have collected 400 life stories from the children. On those 400 life stories, 200 stories have been collected from the supply chain locations. They are here, the supply chain were Lalbagh, Bhairab, and Hemayatpur. 200 stories have been collected from neighborhood. Neighborhood means broader Hazaribagh area. Among the 200 stories that have been collected from neighborhood, 100 life stories have been collected by the children collectors, and 400 life stories have been analyzed by the children with the help of adult facilitators. So this was the first phase of the story analysis project, story analysis process. Children, they have prepared small maps for each of the 400 life stories, and in the upcoming 2 weeks, we will do the work of doing the big maps and the big system maps. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, these are some of the pictures from the children working in the supply chains, from slaughtering of a cow, product of a leather, like making shoes and jackets and stuff like that. So here are some of the photos. Next slide, please. Here you can see two children working under the scorching heat of sun, and here you can see just the snap of home of children. Next slide. So these are our key processes. What we did first, we identified locations and developed the criteria of the storytellers. And then we prepared consent form, report with this, and also people. After that, 300 stories. Later on, criteria for story collectors, and we used a screening workshop to find the potential story collectors from children. After that, we gave them training, and they collected 100. We are in the story analysis phase. Next slide, please. So what have we done to ensure child participation? So as we have a very little time, so I will go fast. So a child-friendly consent form was developed. The ins and bits of our project were expressed as in a way so that a child can easily understand. And no story was collected without any kind of consent. Snowballing method was used. The preferred time of the children. I can remember collecting stories from children later at night, like 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., because that was the time that they had given us. And the venue where the story was collected was selected by the storyteller children themselves. And in our consent form, there was a clause that a child has full liberty to leave the story collection station anytime he or she doesn't feel like. And you know that for 1 hour of they have to employers, we waited them for that time. And while at the training for the story collectors, a child-friendly and participatory training was provided for them. All the phases of the process were implemented, work in mind, and feedbacks were taken from the children after each of these steps to understand how they're feeling and how we can improve ourselves. Please. So here we have talked about what have we done to ensure child participatory analysis phase. What happened is that children, they analyze the stories by myself, though there were adult facilitators present. But after the first day of our analysis workshop, we felt that there was no need of female. There's no facilitators, because children they were owning the process. They were understanding what was going to happen, and they're able to connect dots from each of the stories. And after each day, image brief sessions with them, and ideas were done with the children participants to get the feedback in the process. Next slide. These are some of the challenges that we faced, and we faced from in our story collection and story analysis process. First one was that there was not enough participation from the male children, and it was quite tough to get life stories out of the children who were below 10 to 11 years of old, as they had nothing much to tell, and it was quite tough for us to make them understand proper research. Employers in most cases were skeptical about our intentions when we are rolling the factories to find stories from the children. Were taken from the factory premises. We felt that the children were not opening up as they were scared from their employers, and hiding the actual age of the children by the parents of the employers were quite frequent. And children from Bhoirab, especially this happened with children from Bhoirab, were less confident to talk, as the children were living far away from their parents, so they were not opening up. So they were not opening up, and so we had to give a lot of effort to dig out stories from them. Next slide, please. So these are the findings that came from the formal and informal interviews we did with the children after each of the children empowered after sharing the life stories, as they said that it was first time someone attentively. The wish of a child is to step up a story collection process, enormous trust of the community, and story collectors who work with us in story that for the first they felt values, and while taking feedbacks from them, they said that they felt their voice was heard in every steps that they were part of. So this was from us. Thank you everyone for your time. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Siam and Ranjana. That was a absolutely fascinating and comprehensive presentation of the work that you've been doing in Clarissa. I am absolutely amazed by the level of participation that you engaged with children and the sheer volume of the data that you've collected. I'm really interested in the kind of way in which you engaged young people in the analysis process, and almost they took over that process, as you were saying, Siam. It sounds absolutely fantastic. I have so many questions that I would love to ask you, but I'm conscious of our time, and as nobody has posted any clarification questions in the chat or the Q&A at this moment, what I'd like to do is move on to our second set of presentations, and then we can take some questions and discussion in the last part of the session. So please do be thinking of questions and areas for discussion that you might like to ask our presenters, and you can start populating those in the Q&A at any time. Moving from Bangladesh and Nepal to Mexico now, we're going to hear from Jukoni, Mexico, and Angel Ruas is going to be giving the majority of the presentation. Angel is Deputy Program Manager at Jukoni, Mexico, which is a charity that's been working in the NGO sector for 32 years. So a serious wealth of experience in that area, focusing on developing, applying and sharing solutions for marginalized young people and their families, particularly those affected by violence, to bring about change towards peace, dignity and the formation of a safe and secure home. I'm going to hand over to Angel in just a minute, but I believe the Jukoni CEO, Isabel Crowley, is in the room with us, and that she would also like to say a few words in advance of that. Just to remind you that if you need interpretation for this presentation, there is an interpretation button on your slide. Isabel, are you in the room? Do we have Isabel with us?
Me parece que la sacó, pero ya se está conectando nuevamente.
Good morning, consortium of. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, we can hear you, Isabel. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Actually, we're not hearing you.
Start.
Isabel, perhaps if you turn off your video, we might be able to hear you more clearly.
Okay. So shall I go?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, good morning to everybody. Good morning in Mexico. Good evening. Good afternoon. Wherever you're listening to us. And we are super pleased. I am Isabel Crowley, the CEO of Fundación Jukoni Mexico, which actually means Jukoni means together with the children. And we are super delighted to be here with the Consortium for Street Children and its 180 organizations in 135 countries. I hope you will enjoy what we have to do. We are forever grateful for the opportunity that consortium gives us the influence that we can get, and also all the other opportunities and lessons learned that we can get from all over the world. I just wanted to say thank you, thank you. I want to invite you all to come to Mexico. It's a wonderful place. We do have our Congress also at the end of May, so start preparing. And without further ado, I will ask Angel Rojas, our Director for Programs, so that he can start our presentation, which basically means the opportunities that we've had for really to connect in different ways. And this is all that was happened with the pandemic. Thank you so much, and over to you, Angel.
Muchas gracias, Isabel. Muchísimas gracias al consorcio por invitarnos. Y bueno, yo soy Ángel, soy subdirector de programas en Juconi y quisiera empezar compartiéndoles un poco de Juconi y de lo que hemos hecho respecto a la herramienta de historias digitales. Bueno, me gustaría empezar presentando a Juconi. Juconi tiene más de 32 años trabajando con niñas, niños y adolescentes en situaciones adversas, tales como marginación, violencia familiar transgeneracional, extrema pobreza, y lo hacemos desde 3 pilares que tiene la fundación. Uno es programas Juconi, que somos quienes tienen la atención directa con niñas, niños, adolescentes y sus familias. Otro pilar es el Instituto Juconi, que es el que se encarga de sistematizar las prácticas que llevamos a cabo desde el programa y compartirlas con otras organizaciones que trabajan de manera directa con niñas, niños y adolescentes. Y otro pilar que también es muy importante y que hemos trabajado con mayor intensidad estos últimos años es el área de incidencia, que es quien toma la experiencia propia y la de nuestros socios y construye alianzas para incidir en políticas públicas que benefician a la infancia. En lo que lleva de vida la fundación hemos atendido a 28.934 familias, hemos capacitado a 3.934 profesionales que trabajan y tienen atención directa a niñez y la juventud, y hemos desarrollado 120 proyectos de incidencia. Siguiente, de favor. Bueno, el primer contacto que tuvimos con la herramienta de Digital Storytelling, fue en el 2014 por una invitación por parte de Family for Every Child, que nos invitó a participar en un taller presencial para aprender de la metodología de historias digitales, y los ejemplos que nos mostraron eran historias de niñas y niños. Solo teníamos poca información al respecto, y eso nos hizo pensar que podría ser una herramienta que pudiéramos utilizar con adolescentes y jóvenes, que era donde menos actividad teníamos en la intervención directa. O que tuviéramos una intervención exclusiva para ellas y ellos. Pues había actividades diseñadas más para el entorno familiar y para niños de primera infancia y niños de 6 a 12 años. Pero esto nos dio la oportunidad de ver una posibilidad para darle voz a nuestros jóvenes. Cuando conocimos la herramienta, se experimentó con la metodología y supimos que no solo era un taller de tecnología y arte, sino una experiencia que puede servir desde un enfoque terapéutico, de investigación o incidencia. Siguiente, de favor. Bueno, a partir de esto, consideramos que la metodología de esta herramienta va con los principios del trabajo que tenemos dentro de Fundación Juconi México, como el apego, el manejo de las emociones o el enfoque basado en fortaleza y la construcción de ambientes seguros. Como la historia se hace en base a un momento de la vida del narrador, esto sin duda toca la parte emocional. Es una experiencia terapéutica que ayuda a abordar momentos complejos dentro de la dinámica familiar y el contexto de violencia. El grupo de facilitadores del taller tiene el apoyo o acompañamiento del equipo de terapeutas y el equipo de soporte en cada una de las áreas, precisamente por lo que puede derivar de la experiencia de la dinámica en el taller. Esto no solo durante cada una de las sesiones, sino que es llevado a los procesos familiares en caso de ser necesario. Hemos aprendido que no hay tema que sea fácil o menos profundo, pues el perfil de nuestras familias es básicamente de violencia familiar transgeneracional, marginación y exclusión social. Con base a la experiencia que tenemos en Juconi, hemos notado que no todas las corrientes terapéuticas pueden ser adaptadas a los contextos en los que intervenimos, pero sin duda historias digitales es una forma distinta de llegar a nuestra población, sobre todo con estas familias que no les ha sido fácil conectarse con sus emociones y que lo hacen a través de herramientas muy concretas como es el uso del arte y la tecnología. Siguiente, de favor. La manera en la que integramos la metodología de historias digitales tiene la estructura básica del modelo original. La diferencia es que lo vamos adaptando según el grupo de participantes y la interacción que se va dando una vez que iniciamos con el taller. Por ejemplo, hay momentos en los que la dinámica del grupo de adolescentes puede surgir el tema de no sentirse parte de su familia. Entonces encauzamos la pregunta guía para que sea parte de la historia, ¿no? Y sea un momento en el cual se pueda desarrollar resiliencia tomando la iniciativa de los jóvenes. Por ejemplo, en algún momento tuvimos la pregunta específica de el momento en el que me sentí parte de mi familia. Y a partir de esta pregunta guía, pudimos desarrollar el tema con los jóvenes y pudimos tener productos, es decir, videos que trascendieron no solamente en la vida de los jóvenes, sino también en el entorno familiar. Y a partir de esta experiencia hemos notado que el acompañamiento es muy importante para el proceso. Siguiente, de favor. En este sentido, consideramos muy importante la planeación del taller, es decir, el trabajo previo a ya estar trabajando con los jóvenes, porque consideramos que la interacción previa nos da los elementos necesarios para que el taller sea intencionado a los procesos individuales y a los procesos familiares. Es por ello que cada grupo es considerado como una experiencia nueva en la que los facilitadores estarán acompañando en cada etapa del proceso y reflejando o regresándole a los participantes lo que va sucediendo con la experiencia en cada momento. Como parte de esta planeación, hemos desarrollado algunos criterios para los participantes que nos sirven de guía, pero esto no quiere decir que limite la participación de los que quieran entrar al taller. En la práctica nos da más bien un horizonte de las implicaciones que tendría cada taller. Entonces, nosotros normalmente tenemos a los jóvenes en talleres, en participaciones constantes dentro de los distintos programas, y a partir de estas interacciones es como vamos intencionando y dándole los matices a lo que vamos a trabajar dentro del taller de historias digitales. Siguiente, de favor. Bueno, pues esta herramienta la comenzamos a utilizar en algo a lo que nosotros conocemos como el Club de Jóvenes, que es un espacio que tiene la misión de convocar a jóvenes de nuestras diferentes áreas, de los diferentes programas de atención, a participar en actividades deportivas, artísticas y sociales, con la intención de fomentar relaciones sociales sanas entre ellas y ellos e incrementar un sentido de pertenencia a un grupo, donde no haya situaciones emocionales que sean adversas más que complejas, como lo es, por ejemplo, el pertenecer a una banda y las acciones dañinas que puedan derivar de participar en este tipo de grupos juveniles, ¿no? Y que puedan tener un impacto negativo para ellos, para sus familias o para su entorno. Algo que les llama muchísimo la atención a los jóvenes es el uso de la tecnología y el material de arte. Entonces, dentro de los criterios que consideramos que eran necesarios para ver quién podría ingresar a estos talleres es pues tener entre 12 y 18 años, un manejo emocional que ya tuviera coherencia entre lo que sienten y lo que expresan, que puedan contar con familias que los acompañen dentro de los procesos, y pues, sobre todo el que puedan aceptar el participar. Los grupos que manejamos en cada una de las etapas de los talleres son de 6 a 8 niñas, niños o adolescentes, y 2 educadoras que van a facilitar el taller. O sea, esta es como la estructura general que tenemos dentro del desarrollo de los talleres. Siguiente, de favor. Bueno, ya hablando específicamente de los videos, quisiéramos compartir algunos testimonios, algunos resultados que hemos tenido dentro de la participación de los talleres. Siguiente, de favor. Quisiera compartirles, por ejemplo, después de haber trabajado en un taller, una pareja de hermanos que no tenía una relación estrecha, a partir de su participación en estos talleres de historias digitales, pudieron comprender lo que pensaba o sentía entre ellos, ¿no? Algo que antes no habían podido, algo de lo que no habían podido hablar previamente. Su relación era muy tensa. En cualquier momento esta relación tenía situaciones violentas, tenía situaciones de lucha. Entonces, el poder haber participado un hermano en el taller y poder mostrarle el producto final, el video a su hermano y a la comunidad, pudo dar la oportunidad de entender mejor cómo era que se estaba sintiendo con la presencia de este hermano y con la presencia de ocupar un espacio específico. Entonces, el vínculo emocional se mejoró. Otra experiencia es entre un padre y un hijo. Después de haber visto la presentación, de haber visto el video, el papá pues se sintió bastante conmovido. Se pudo trabajar para incrementar el apego seguro. El papá estaba en constante conflicto con el joven. No habían oportunidades de comunicarse. Cada momento en el cual el joven quería expresar algo o el papá quería expresar algo, bueno, el papá y la mamá querían expresar algo hacia el joven, siempre derivaba en una situación tensa, violenta en algunos momentos. Entonces, el haber podido ver cómo se estaba sintiendo el joven a través de un video, a través de la construcción de un video, y el joven dentro de la participación del taller, el haberse dado cuenta que no todos los momentos eran adversos, sino que también había momentos en los cuales podía haber convivencia, podía haber interacción positiva, ayudó mucho a que se abrieran los canales de comunicación y se empezaran a desarrollar estrategias de apego seguro. En otro de los talleres también pudimos ver la participación de un adolescente que había perdido a un hermano y que dentro de la dinámica familiar pues era un tema del cual no se hablaba, pero que estaba en el aire, ¿no? Decimos que era el elefante rosa que en medio de la sala que no se nombraba, pero que causaba muchísimos conflictos, ocasionaba muchas dinámicas que no ayudaban ni abonaban al desarrollo del adolescente. En la participación del taller, la adolescente pudo descubrir que estaba sintiendo estas emociones hacia su hermano, pudo trabajar el proceso de duelo a través de la generación del video, y una vez que lo pudo presentar con sus papás, ellos también se pudieron dar cuenta que era un tema que aún no habían podido cerrar. Entonces, a partir de esto, a partir de vivir esta experiencia desde un espacio en el cual no esperaban abordarlo, pidieron a su terapeuta familiar el poder retomar el tema y lo pudieron trabajar. También tenemos otra experiencia. Esto se dio con un joven que estaba como residente en cuidados residenciales, que había salido de su casa, había perdido los cuidados parentales debido a la violencia que la familia de origen mantenía sobre él. Entonces, él veía muy lejano el momento en el cual podía ser reintegrado a su familia. Tenía muchísimos conflictos hacia su familia, nunca se sintió parte de su familia, y dentro de la casa de cuidados residenciales tampoco se sentía parte del grupo. Era un joven que constantemente estaba aislado, que en algunos momentos tenía un semblante muy depresivo. El haber trabajado con esta herramienta y al haber también tenido el acompañamiento del grupo y de los facilitadores, pudo darse cuenta que si bien era muy complicada la situación que lo había traído a los cuidados residenciales, pues también se pudo dar cuenta que dentro de los cuidados residenciales pudo entablar relaciones significativas. Entonces pudo identificar un entorno familiar dentro de los cuidados residenciales que después pudo replicar al momento en el que fue reintegrado a su familia de origen. Es importante aquí mencionar que cuando brindábamos cuidados residenciales, trabajábamos no solamente con el niño que estaba en cuidados residenciales, sino también con la familia de origen. Aquí el conflicto es que el niño no quería regresar a su familia de origen, aunque la familia de origen ya había tenido bastantes avances en la ruptura de los ciclos transgeneracionales de violencia. Entonces, a partir del uso de esta herramienta, pues, se pudo dar la oportunidad de ver a su familia desde una perspectiva distinta. Siguiente, de favor. Bueno, los talleres nos han dejado muchísimas experiencias como equipo en la forma en la que atendemos a los jóvenes y cómo procesan las experiencias. Y durante los talleres tuvimos pues algunos retos, tuvimos deserciones de los talleres, es decir, empezamos a trabajar la herramienta y los jóvenes ya no quisieron seguir trabajándola, ¿no? En base a esto nos dimos cuenta que la pregunta guía era muy compleja en algunas ocasiones o era detonante de algunas situaciones que habían generado un trauma profundo. También observamos que los grupos de jóvenes de diferentes programas y la participación de grupos mixtos, es decir, compuestos de niñas y niños, fomentaba la sociabilización y fomentaba también una dinámica de cooperación. También nos dimos cuenta de algunas limitantes que teníamos que considerar en los participantes, tales como la carencia de habilidades de escritura, lectura, síntesis y en algunos casos el uso de la tecnología. Aquí tengo que recordar que la población que atendemos son niñas, niños, adolescentes y familias que viven en contextos de alta marginación, rezago educativo y poco acceso a la tecnología. Entonces, a partir de este entendimiento y estas dinámicas, desarrollamos algunas consideraciones. Siguiente, de favor. Algunas cosas que implementamos fue, por ejemplo, el desarrollo de una presentación previa de la herramienta, para que niñas, niños y adolescentes conozcan, o sea, sin necesidad de ser participantes, que puedan conocer el producto final y los elementos con los que vamos a estar trabajando. En cuanto a los retos de la escritura y la tecnología, vimos importante implementar talleres previos para preparar. Perdón, creo que hubo escuché un comentario. Ah, ok. Gracias. Bueno, dentro de los retos sobre la escritura y el uso de la tecnología, vimos importante implementar talleres previos para preparar cognitivamente en herramientas como la escritura, el manejo de aplicaciones y el uso de la tecnología. Hicimos mini talleres previos que ayudaran al desarrollo de las historias. En otros grupos de niñas, niños, adolescentes, podíamos entrar de lleno con la metodología, pero en algunos teníamos que tener estos mini talleres previos. Y bueno, era importante también explicar que los videos pueden ser compartidos con quienes ellos decidan y que los propósitos de estos videos podrían utilizarse no solamente para el uso dentro de su proceso educativo terapéutico familiar, sino que también podrían ser utilizados para fines de procuración, para fines de incidencia, para compartir la experiencia con otros niños y jóvenes y que también se animaran a participar en los talleres de historias digitales. Entonces, esta explicación también ayudaba a que ellos pudieran decidir el nivel en que compartir. Entonces, estas charlas eran previas a iniciar el taller. Durante el taller y en distintos momentos del taller, preguntábamos cómo iban con la toma de decisiones y si había habido alguna modificación. Al final de los talleres, la mayoría de los jóvenes, puedo decir que un 95% de los participantes decidieron compartir su historia, no solamente con el grupo de trabajo, sino también para uso de incidencia o para uso de compartirlos con otras organizaciones o con otras personas con las que ellos no tuvieran un contacto directo. También detectamos consideraciones importantes como el que hermanos no participaran en un mismo grupo. Esto debido a que en algunas veces entraban en conflicto las historias que exponían. Es decir, al tener dos perspectivas distintas y una misma historia o un mismo evento, a veces había una lucha entre cuál era la perspectiva correcta. Entonces, esto dificultaba la generación de la cohesión de grupo y pues la resiliencia que pretendíamos del trabajo en el taller. También tuvimos en algún momento unos primos y se daba también este mismo fenómeno. También pudimos ver que sí teníamos que contar con el apoyo de la familia, sobre todo en los casos de niñas, niños y jóvenes que iban a los centros de día, porque veíamos que había momentos dentro del taller que eran sumamente emotivos y que podían resultar pues en un acto de descontención. Teníamos el equipo de soporte, por ejemplo, los terapeutas familiares que daban contención en el momento y después se llevaba a la familia, pero la familia tenía que estar involucrada para saber que esto podía pasar. Siguiente, de favor. Bueno, con base a estas experiencias que he compartido, ahora nos reunimos con el equipo de facilitadores por lo menos 2 veces al año y reflexionamos acerca de las experiencias que se dan en cada uno de los talleres. Y esta actividad nos permite revisar y reflexionar acerca de nuestras prácticas, mejorarlas y detectar elementos en los que necesitamos fortalecer como institución, capacitarnos y desarrollar mayor experiencia en la facilitación del taller de historias digitales. No solo la experiencia de cada taller con los niños, niñas y adolescentes nos ha ayudado a mejorar nuestras prácticas, sino a la formación de entrenadores como una experiencia más profunda y para conocer la metodología. Siguiente, de favor. Bueno, pues llevamos ya 6 años implementando la herramienta y sin duda la pandemia nos generó un reto bastante importante, no solamente en este tema, en el de historias digitales, sino que también tuvimos que adaptar muchas de las herramientas de intervención que realizamos desde los distintos programas en Juconi. Entonces, específicamente hablando de la herramienta, pues hicimos una intervención con una modalidad a distancia, pero historias digitales pues tenía sus propias características, ¿no? Entonces, en la planeación pudimos darnos cuenta que no podíamos implementar un taller completamente a distancia debido al impacto que el grupo tiene en el proceso de contención y generación de un espacio que propicie la resiliencia. Es por eso que adoptamos un modelo híbrido, adaptando los espacios físicos y las interacciones para prevenir los contagios. El resultado fue diferente, pudimos observar una interacción más dispuesta y mucho gusto de interactuar y compartir. Creemos que no solo ayudó a procesar las experiencias adversas pasadas, sino que también ayudó a lidiar con el contexto presente. Siguiente, de favor. A manera de conclusión, pues lo que llevamos trabajando la herramienta, tenemos a 2 entrenadores capacitados y a 30 facilitadores también capacitados para poder implementar la herramienta en distintos contextos. Y hemos intervenido a 90 jóvenes dándole uso a los productos, es decir, a los videos, para la promoción de la herramienta con otros jóvenes, como para fines de capacitación con otras organizaciones en el uso de la herramienta y también con fines de incidencia, ¿no? Con temas muy específicos, como por ejemplo el tema de género, de participación infantil y de derechos de niñas, niños y adolescentes. Y bueno, sería todo de mi parte. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Angel and Isabel. That was a fascinating insight into the way in which Juconi are using these digital stories, and both a very detailed approach to collecting stories. I was really fascinated by the way in which the digital aspect of your stories became a really important tool in bringing families together and enabling families to start connecting and reconnecting with each other. I thought that was absolutely fascinating and looked like such a great project. So thank you very much for all the work that you're doing there. We now have about 20 minutes for questions and discussion. So I'm going to go to the chat, to the Q&A, and see if we have any there. There is one question that's been posted here at the moment. Cecilia, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think this was in relation to the Clarissa project, was asking Sayem and Ranjana to talk a little bit more about the tools that they use to collect the life stories. For example, were they questionnaires or discussion based? And I mean, maybe Angel, you have something to contribute to that as well. So would any of our presenters like to respond to that?
Okay, so the question here was what kind of tools you used, right? Questionnaires or discussion based. Mainly, we didn't have any sort of questionnaire for our life story collection process. It was mainly discussion based, and our motto was to go there in an open mind and let the child talk as much as they want. And though we had some prompt questions in our mind, so when he or she was talking, we asked them those prompt questions. I mean, this question was like, how long have you been working? Or if you are migrated, how long it has been since you were in Dhaka, and stuff like that. And they answered those questions, and they were talking about their lives. And though we had some themes in our head, and when we saw the child talking about these things, we asked deepening question regarding these themes. I mean, when a child talked about I came to Dhaka 4 years ago and started working around like 3 years ago. Then we asked, who told you to go to work? Was it your father or mother, or did you face any pressure to go to work from your relatives or your peers? And how is the work condition and stuff like that? Actually, we didn't have any sort of questionnaire, and the life history collection process actually dependent on was the facilitator who was having the discussion with the child and how he or she was feeling that day, actually, because as there was no set of certain questions, so he actually had to, base his discussion on prompt questions and asking depending questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was a great response to that. And I think, really interesting in the way in which you're allowing children to kind of lead the process in terms of telling their own stories. And really there's no structure to that, but it allows children to take ownership of the process, really, and guide you in terms of the stories that they want to tell. We've had a question come through from Pia for Angel. Specifically, so Pia's asking if you can talk a little bit about what has been the most difficult, unexpected situation that's arisen through the process of the digital storytelling, and how did you respond to that? Did you manage to get that, Angel?
Sí.
Brilliant.
Sí, muchísimas gracias. Bueno, como les comentaba en la presentación, creo que las preguntas, ninguna pregunta guía es sencilla. Pareciera que cualquier tema del que hablemos va a evocar una situación compleja y difícil en un entorno en el cual estos jóvenes han vivido experiencias muy adversas, ¿no? Que han generado un trauma profundo. Recuerdo mucho un caso en el cual la pregunta era un momento en el cual te sentiste parte de tu familia específicamente, y un joven empezó a hablar del abandono de su mamá. Esto había sucedido en fechas muy recientes, entonces el joven estaba bastante emotivo con este tema. Él se quedó a vivir con su papá ejercía muchísima violencia hacia él. Era una violencia que si bien notábamos, él no podía todavía elaborar. Él justificaba mucho esta violencia, o sea, la justificaba desde el sentido de que pensaba que lo golpeaba, por ejemplo, porque lo protegía. Entonces, el darse cuenta en conjunto con el grupo que esto no estaba bien, que estaba siendo víctima de muchísima violencia, además del abandono de su mamá, él terminó abandonando el taller. Justamente este elemento nos dio pauta para poder integrar al proceso el acompañamiento de un terapeuta que pudiera dar contención y seguimiento a nivel familiar. Después pudimos ya dar una intervención con el papá y podemos integrarlo nuevamente al proceso educativo familiar, pero creo que esta fue una experiencia bastante drástica para el equipo y con el uso de esta herramienta.
Thanks very much for that answer. And I think that really brings to life the extreme difficulties that the children in both these projects are facing on a day-to-day basis, and the importance of the work that both Clarissa and Hukoni are doing in the space. Pia's commenting that it was a really interesting and honest answer, and to thank you for that. I think it leads me to a question that I want to ask all three panelists, since there's nothing popping up in my Q&A box at the moment, is around the kind of confidentiality aspect of this kind of work. I mean, I've also been doing work around sort of storytelling and story mapping digitally as well in the Growing Up in the Streets project, and it's something we are very kind of conscious of. But in both these projects, there's very in-depth life stories being told. I mean, it's the kind of rationale for the evidence base and the need for this is very clear. But equally, in these cases, how do we ensure that no harm comes to the young people? How do we ensure that confidentiality and anonymity? So, for example, Ranjana, you mentioned that you don't show any photographs of the young people, but how do you make sure that their stories are not so in depth that they can still be identified if they're shared as an evidence base? And then for Angel, with the digital stories, I thought it was fascinating how that helped families connect, but you also talked about using those digital stories to share, to sort of, you know, for more widely to convince other children and also policy. And so I just wondered about the confidentiality aspect there. So I wonder if any of the speakers would like to respond to that in terms of what you did.
Yes, thank you for asking that. As mentioned, like safeguarding of the children is very much important for the Clarissa project and in such kind of projects. So because we're taking the life story of the children. So first what we did was we didn't put any name of the children. We had the coding system, and that we have generated before taking the life stories. And once we go on a field, we don't ask the children name itself. We do the informal introduction because there were pre-induction sessions and rapport building sessions. We already knew the children, so the codes were put over there. And once any of the identifiable location, like mostly if they are in the AS-based organization or street-connected children-based organizations, then that place is very common and known to everybody. So what we did is we put as in coding also in that part. Like for street connected, we put street connected organization 1, 2, and only the key people in the organization will know that, like 2 or 3 participatory action researcher will know that. Otherwise, nobody knows like who is that child or from where that stories are coming. And even their relative names or family names, if the children have mentioned, we have change the name also on that. And yet again, the data protection is very much important. So once we bring that story and type, do the transcription of all those story, we have one dedicated locker based in our consortium project office. And the key to that cabinet was only given to our country coordinator. So nobody else have an access to that part. And sharing of the stories, like once we do the peer review and all that, we only did it through a Microsoft Teams. We don't share it in an email or to anybody through any other platform. So even earlier when our one of the partner asked to see the story, we have to take the approval from the ideas, like, can we share the story? So once they say no, we cannot move further with that. So that's how we try to maintain as much possible. And so far it has been a really reliable source from Nepal's side. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Ranjana. That's a really comprehensive response there, and it looks like lots of steps have been put in place. Angel, do you want to come in and say anything in regard to the digital part?
Sí, claro. Bueno, desde Juconi también tenemos un sistema de clasificación basado en códigos, es decir, no manejamos el nombre de los participantes, sino más bien un número único de familias y un ID. El resguardo de las historias se hace en un disco, no está de manera digital en nubes o en internet, sino se hace físicamente y está en resguardo también de dirección de programa. compartimos únicamente los videos e historias que han tenido la aprobación no solamente de los participantes en los talleres, sino en caso de ser menores, de sus cuidadores. Y los videos que compartimos no tienen materiales, por ejemplo, fotografías o nombres explícitos. La mayoría de los videos están constituidos por dibujos por construcciones artísticas que expresen lo que se está, digamos que la idea, pero no datos concretos. Esto tampoco se comparte en redes sociales, se comparte con grupos, digamos, técnicos y con propósitos muy específicos a los que también se pide pues un proceso de firma de confidencialidad de manejo de datos. Entonces, de esta forma protegemos la identidad de los niños.
Thanks so much, Angel. That was, again, really helpful to hear that it's the artwork that's shared on the videos as well, and not necessarily images of children. A question on a similar theme of do no harm has come through from Toybox, and they would like to know what practical tips or suggestions can the panelists share on planning these kinds of activities to include appropriate responses and follow up where it's needed. So, for example, they're talking about budgeting for the psychosocial support or other key follow-up that might be required when a young person or a child shares a traumatic story. So I think that's open to all three of you to respond to that. Who would like to go first?
Hi, so thank you for the question. I would like to address the question by saying that actually it was a bit tricky for all of us while as we are working in the slums. And these are the children, they are telling us their stories. And first of all, why it is tricky is that whether we had to think that whether this certain child need any sort of psychological support or not. And when my personal experience says the children that we took a story from, they are so institutionalized in this kind of life. Actually, they don't think that this is they think this is quite normal for me, and it is normal. It is bound to happen with my life. So they do not feel anything different. And if they are what we did in our life history collection process, when we feel that a child he or she is feeling vulnerable while telling the stories, or his story was a bit traumatic. So what we did that we did informal follow-ups with the children after 2 or 3 days as we're roaming around the area. Suppose I went there today and collected the stories. After 1 or 2 days, I went to the area again to collect stories from some other children. And while doing that, we talked with the children informally. How are you feeling right now? Do you need any support or anything like that? But till now, no one has come to us or said that, yes, I need support and I need support from you. Though there were budgeted activities which we planned earlier as a means of psychosocial support if the children needed anything, but we haven't found any cases till now. I'm talking about Bangladesh experience where we had to support any child psychosocially. But as I said earlier, I do not think the children who are worst from child labor, they have seen the worst of their lives. So I do not think, but what I saw that they do not think this. They think this is normal. This happens to every one of their lives. So the life that they face, maybe from outside perspective, we may feel like this is traumatic for them, but they do not see. My personal experience say that they do not see this as traumatic as we may find. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Really interesting. Ranjana, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'd like to add on Nepal's perspective on that. In our case, we actually had like around 70 to 80 cases that we needed to give the psychosocial support. And firstly, what we did was before going on a field, we as a staff also were trained on the label of like immediate support or medium-term support or long-term support. We need to identify whether the children need immediate support or long-term support. So if immediate support, like if we give the words of consolation or give them certain time, then they can overcome the fears or they can overcome their trauma, and then we talk to them after 1 or 2 days over a phone. But if we find like they need a long-term support, then we have a collaboration with one of the psychosocial foundation, and we recommend the case to our social safeguarding personnel within 24 hours, and we have developed a format for that. And for that, we further give that support to the children. And once the cases are closed, we work with them until the cases were closed. So those kind of supports were given. And as a part of the budgeting was mentioned, we definitely, if we are running a project for a children, we need to have a separate kind of planning to give to the children. And it was not only psychosocial, it was also the food support we have to give, because during the COVID lockdown time also, where there were many children, or AS sector, it has been especially closed by the government along with other sectors, and as night entertainment business was not allowed, so many children were without food. So we have to plan it out for that also in between the project. That was the Nepal experience.
Thanks so much, Ranjana. Very helpful response there too. Angel?
Sí, bueno, desde Juconi lo que hacemos realmente en Juconi es un apoyo psicosocial, y Historias Digitales forma parte de este apoyo psicosocial para intencionar más el proceso educativo terapéutico familiar. Digamos que durante la pandemia pudimos identificar casos muy específicos que podrían trabajarse exclusivamente con historias digitales. Sin embargo, nos dimos cuenta de la importancia de la comunidad para sostener este proceso. Entonces, fue como hicimos un modelo híbrido, es decir, momentos en los cuales hubiera una interacción en el 1 a 1 o interacción grupal, y la contención familiar. Entonces, sí consideramos que esto es muy importante y potencializa mucho el uso de la herramienta, porque no solamente se trabaja a nivel de las necesidades del joven, de la niña o el niño, sino también cuando se integra al contexto familiar y al contexto comunitario.
Thanks very much for that answer too. I think really helpful tips and responses given to that. There's currently no more questions posted in the chat, but we are rapidly running out of time as we approach 4 o'clock. So I think it just leaves me just to say a few words of thank you to all of our speakers. If Saem and Ranjana could put their cameras back on, I think that would just be really helpful so that we can see you when we thank you for your presentations. I have to say, really fascinating, in-depth look into storytelling and the kind of powerful way in which storytelling is a truly participatory process, enabling children to lead the approach to evidence gathering. You know, we hear that the tools that are used are very informal tools, although there's lots of preparation that goes into that. And I think you all talked about the in-depth preparation around trust building, supporting young people to feel comfortable, to understand the process and to engage with the tools that you want to use. But equally then, there's no set questions. It's all about being led by the children and enabling them to take the lead in telling their own stories. I think for me, across the presentations, it was really fantastic to hear that not only did you involve children in collecting data and in leading their own data collection, but also in the analysis process of that data. And I think that's often one where we find more difficult, is to engage in that analysis process with young people, particularly with such large data sets. So I think that was really an amazing part of both these projects that we heard about. But then, of course, you know, the impacts. It was fantastic to hear also the kind of movement of impacts coming out of this storytelling projects, from the individual impacts, where Angel talked about the therapeutic impacts, where young people engaged between their families, and also the collective impacts, looking at solutions for their families and for themselves, particularly those engaged in child labour. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. Fantastic presentations. And just to hand over to Shona, just for your final close. I think you wanted to say something.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. I just want to echo Lorraine's thank yous to all of the speakers. Those were some really interesting presentations and discussions. Thank you also to Lorraine for moderating, some excellent timekeeping skills, and also to the interpreters for allowing us to have a conversation in 2 languages. Just to let you know what is coming up next, our first session tomorrow is celebrating 1 year of the working group on women and girls, where we'll hear about the use of the most significant change methodology. It also involves collecting stories, so that might be interesting for those who attended this session. And another couple of interesting ones to point out to you are the Accessing Essential Services session tomorrow, when we'll be talking about different interventions in health and education, including child participation in advocacy activities. And finally, just as we were talking about trauma, you might be interested in the session on mental health and trauma awareness for street-connected children on Thursday. So we hope to see some of you there. Thank you very much for joining us.